Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
The top of the mind issue today is the killing of the 4 alleged rapists and murderers of the young veterinarian doctor in Hyderabad. Now, this has had predictable reactions. People in the liberal community are obviously aghast. I am also aghast. Nobody should be allowed to take the law into their hands, and I will tell you why. Uh, but a lot of others, including many celebrities, many influencers as they are called now, and many politicians also, starting with Mayawati, are celebrating this. And they are saying this is the way to deal with crime like this and criminals like this. So let me use this opportunity to go into the details of some aspects of what we might call as encounter killings and what we might call as judicial, extrajudicial, what is good, what is bad, what is justified, what isn't, what gets you peace and public order, what doesn't. But to understand all that, we first have to understand some basic facts. And that is what I'm trying to declutter for you. So first of all, what is the basic principle, one of the central principles of the modern state? One of the central principles of the modern states since the 16th century, and it's been evolving over time. I can take you right back to the time of Kautilya and others, because everybody has been imagining an entity called the state. So all the philosophers, all the thinkers, the distillation of their thought processes over millennia finally found some shape in the 16th century in the shape of the modern state. So you first had this great treatise by Jean Bodin, the French philosopher, thinker, political scientist, who wrote the 6 books of the Republic. And there he said for the first time that violence should be the monopoly of the state. This was further then made clearer by Thomas Hobbes in the following century. And then in the 20th century, Max Weber, who is the most quoted on this subject. And Max Weber, in his famous lecture, Politics as a Vocation in 1918, said, among other things, modern state emerged by expropriating the means of political organization and dominations, including violence, and by establishing the legitimacy of its rule. So, important point. State has the monopoly over the use of coercion, violence, etc., but through legitimacy, which means the state has to be legitimate, and these options, violence has to be used or employed legitimately. So any area where the state uses violence, as happened in this case in Hyderabad, undoubtedly, there's no need to say alleged there, the state did use violence to kill these 4 people. What is arguable is why, was it justified or not, but they did kill them. So for that to be justified, the crucial test is it has to be through legitimate means, legitimate reasons, and therefore lawful under the settled law of the land. Of course, under section 100 of the IPC, a human being, even police, can fire in self-defense. So I'm not taking that away, but all that has to be established. In this case, the state has used violence to kill 4 citizens. That once we have that out, we look at what is an encounter. So once again, the essence of Cut the Clutter is that we are clinical. We are clinical and we try to simplify complex facts. So there is no such thing as an encounter. There are encounters and encounters and encounters. So let me try and divide them in 4 categories. And this comes again through experience, because I have spent a lot of my time as a reporter covering many of these issues. So one is a classical, old-fashioned, genuine encounter. Those are the kind of encounters you saw between the police and dacoits. Police chase a dacoit gang, they come in contact with each other, firing starts, a genuine firing. They can similarly be genuine encounters today between police and terrorists, because dacoits are more or less gone now. You've seen many such genuine encounters. There was some in Bangalore with some of the conspirators in Rajiv Gandhi assassination. I'm only trying to help you jog your memory with the more prominent cases, or Batla House in Delhi. I know there are many controversies, but I disagree with all those controversies. There is no doubt that that was a genuine encounter, because people went to that house to search for Indian Mujahideen people, and when police were seen there, they fired. So this was a genuine exchange of fire. These are genuine encounters. Of course, they can all be debated, but these are genuine, old-fashioned encounters. The second is somewhat more complicated. These are also encounters, but these are what we might call controlled killings. What is a controlled killing? When a state uses its power, its discretion to have a human being killed without due process of the judiciary or through the judiciary. This can be because somebody at some level in the state thinks that you cannot enforce that law or that punishment judicially, or that option is not available to you, or for whatever reason, in the rarest of rare cases, you have to use that method. Usually, these methods have been used in terrorist hit areas. For example, in Punjab, a great deal. In Kashmir, a great deal. In the Northeast, not that much, occasionally. But Punjab and Kashmir, these have been used quite often. So what happens is, in a controlled killing, that you use intelligence operations or a mole or a bunch of moles to lure people who you want to put away, and then you get into a situation where you are ready for them and you kill them. I wrote this a few years back after the controversy over Ishrat Jahan killing, and got a bit of bad press from the liberal side. But the question I raised was a simple one, that Ishrat Jahan encounter, she was accompanied by 3 Pakistanis. Nobody cried for them. And those 3 Pakistanis, as it turned out later, also in David Coleman Hadley's statements, had come to carry out some big terror act in Gujarat. Having said that, I only said that if you make an issue of this, then you must make an issue of every other such killing where intelligence agencies and the police had worked together. So, caught state police, bold intelligence bureau. That's been done for a long time. These are what you call as controlled killings. And my argument again then was, and I'm mentioning these to illustrate this to you, that while the Ishrat Jahan encounter was carried out when UPA was in power in Delhi, not NDA, NDA wasn't in power, UPA was in power in Delhi, under the UPA also some other important encounters took place, or quote-unquote encounters took place. One was Azad and the other Kishanji. Both were the ranking top-level members of the Maoist organizations. Both were controlled killings of the same kind. Both were, if they were legal, they were as legal, or if they were legitimate, they were as legitimate as Ishrat Jahan. If Ishrat Jahan was illegal and illegitimate, these two were as illegal and as illegitimate. So the state uses extrajudicial and extra constitutional methods in almost every country in the world right now. In fact, if you want to read more about it, read Mark Mazzetti's brilliant book, The Way of the Knife, in which he talks about how the CIA morphed from an intelligence agency into a killing machine, especially in Afghanistan and then in the Middle East, as America launched what was called the War on Terror. And he actually tells you that the American system worked out a whole protocol by which somebody could be killed without trial. That was a controlled killing, and in this case, there was a team of lawyers that sat in the White House, that assessed intelligence data coming in from everywhere, then gave a finding to the president saying that so-and-so is a threat, so-and-so should be killed, and the president signed on the file. So these were extrajudicial, extra-constitutional in a way, killings, but there was a due process even in this case because somebody was taking responsibility. And this, in fact, if you read the book, you will realize that initially all the various sanctions they were giving were about non-Americans until they came with the case of Awlaki, who was in Yemen but of American citizenship. So complicated processes were created. In India, we haven't created those processes. So these are controlled killings or encounters. That is the second kind of encounter, the most complex of them all. The third kind of encounter is what we might call as uh, Bollywood encounter. Cop, Mr. Dirty Harry, Mr. Singham, Mr. Somebody catches hold of a bad guy and says, Sale, मैं तेरा encounter करूँगा. Right? That means I've got you with me. Nobody knows you are with me because the court hasn't given you with me to me. I will go and shoot you someplace, or you rat on everybody else. That's one. Or when it is completely under the radar encounters. For example, in Bombay, almost 20 years back, a bunch of police officers in Bombay were authorized to kill people from the underworld. And I once recorded a walk the talk, in fact, with two of them, Pradeep Sharma and Daya Nayak, who both had notched up. I think one was about 5 short of a century at that point, and one had crossed a century of people they had killed. And the fact is that they were cheered because that was the time when Underworld was controlling Bollywood, Underworld was controlling Bombay's building business. Underworld was really ruling Bombay, and in a way they destroyed the Underworld rule in Bombay, but it was all done extrajudicially, extra-constitutionally. All of them faced cases in the end. All of them got acquitted in the end. In fact, Pradeep Sharma, who had been fired from service, got reinstated almost 10 years later. And just as an aside, in these recent assembly elections, he contested on the ticket of the Shiv Sena. He did not win at Nalasopara. He finished second, he did not win, but he even contested election as a Shiv Sena candidate. He has probably the highest score, maybe a double century or more of these encounter killings. So these are then completely illegal. मैं तेरा encounter करूँगा, encounter करके मारूँगा, which means you decide so and so is a bad guy. Either you catch him or you chase him and shoot him in some place because you have the license to kill. Finally, you come to the trickiest category. And I will tell you why it's the trickiest. It is the custodial killing. It is the encounter which is actually custodial killing. What is custodial killing? When a court places a human being or a citizen in the custody of the police or the jail. So when it is police custody, then police has the person with them in the lockup. When it's judicial custody, then the person is in jail. Say, look at Chidambaram's case. First, CBI had him in their custody. That was like police custody. He was in the CBI headquarters. He could be interrogated all the time. Similarly, later, Enforcement Directorate had him in their custody, which was like police custody. Then each one, when he was moved to judicial custody, transferred him to Tihar jail. Because once you are in jail, then you are supposed to be under the protection of the court. Either way, once you are in custody, you are under the protection of law. So when police gets an accused in their custody, they are also responsible for his safety. Safety, proper treatment, no third degree, etc., etc. But those, you are then going up the value chain. The first thing is they are responsible for protecting his life. So these are cases of custodial killings. When somebody is in your custody, you kill the person. And I have seen many of these cases. Story is always the same. Sometimes an accused may die in interrogation. Sometimes an accused may die because of torture or use of third degree. Sometimes an accused may die because maybe some big shot happens in movies, also happens in real life also. The real mafia leader says, boss, isko zara nikal do, kal ko zyada bolega, right? And always the police says he was trying to escape, so we shot him. Now, I don't exactly know what has happened. Maybe this story that the police is saying that they tried to snatch our weapons, they fired at us, they hit a couple of us. Maybe it's all true. I can't judge it. But the fact is that these are killings in custody. These were people in police custody. On that, there is no denying the basic fact. So, the conclusion is that this is the fourth category of so-called encounter killings, which is custodial deaths. These people have died in custody. The court had entrusted the police with their custody for the purposes of interrogating them and getting information out of them, so they could be charged in a court of law tomorrow and prosecuted. That hasn't happened. Now, whether the police has been trigger happy or whether these people were desperate and tried to escape, maybe we'll get to know in the course of time. Now, I take you to an even more tricky issue. And I raise a question. Do handcuffs, Hatkadi, do handcuffs save lives? Handcuffs are not nice things. You don't want to see anybody in handcuffs. It is inhuman, whether it's handcuffs or irons of any kind. You see those in Mughal Azam and stuff. People are tied with chains, etc. Not just Madhubala. But so all irons are inhuman, and more modern societies are going away from them. But should you not handcuff any under trial? Now, in many civilized modern societies, especially America, although America is very trigger happy about these things, all accused are handcuffed. All accused are handcuffed, and they're handcuffed behind their backs, mainly to restrain them so they can do nothing funny. India is a unique country with so much unresolved crime and so much mess, terrorism, etc., and rapes, etc., where nobody can be handcuffed. Now think, if these four were handcuffed as criminals of this level, rape and murder both, they all four were already exposed to death sentence, not just because they committed a rape, but also because they murdered the woman. So they were people facing death. They are desperate, but they couldn't be handcuffed. Why? Because in 1995, Supreme Court of India, and this was the bench of Justice Kuldeep Singh, who headed it, and Justice Venkatachalaya, two first-class judges, but two first-class, very liberal judges. They passed an order, a sweeping order, barring the use of handcuffs or any other restraints on prisoners under trials, etc. This was in response to a petition that an organization called Citizens for Democracy, headed by Kuldeep Nair, famous old journalist who passed away last year. They filed a petition, and the court then gave orders that nobody can be handcuffed in India. Now, this also took you one step forward from an earlier order by Justice Krishna Iyer, which was more colorfully written in his style. And if I start referring to that, it'll take me an hour even finishing the preamble. He did not write brief judgments. He wrote beautifully. But these judges then said they invoked Article 14, Article 19, and Article 21 of the Constitution. So using these three articles, 14, 19, and 21, the judges wrote, "We declare and direct and lay down a rule that handcuffs or other fetters shall not be forced on a prisoner, whether he is in remand or whether he's in judicial remand or non-judicial remand, which means police remand or judicial remand." So basically what that means is you cannot handcuff any prisoner. So you see these ridiculous pictures. You see Ajmal Ahmed Kasab being marched to the court or someplace with one guy, a cop holding one hand, one holding the other. It's almost like Dharmendra and Amitabh Bachchan, ye dosti hum nahi todenge. Only in India do you see hardened criminals, terrorists, rapists being led by the hand by policemen. Why? Because two decent judges banned the use of handcuffs. Now, what happens with handcuffs is, why do I ask the question whether they save lives? In this, first of all, it actually does prevent really bad guys from escaping. People who might even want to escape at danger to their own lives. Second, it saves policemen's lives. And third, it takes away this excuse from the policemen that so and so were trying to escape, they try to snatch our weapons and we kill them. That's a commonly used excuse. In fact, every police force, I'm sure in every police station, has a standard 3-para FIR to base this on. And it will be something like that, goli mere sir ke upar se choo choo karte hui nikal gayi, meri pagdi mein bhi lag gayi aur meri cap mein bhi lag gayi. They all have the same story. But just these handcuffs will save lives. They will prevent people escaping. They will also take away this excuse from the police. So this is something that our courts must revisit. I think it was a well-intentioned idea, but sort of went overboard a little bit. Next point, before I conclude, and a lot of people who are celebrating this action are saying, but look at your courts. They are blaming the judges with good reason. Our courts take forever. And it is true. And I'll give you some data. And this data comes from the website of National Judicial Data Grid, which my young colleague Apurva Mandhani found for me. It says that at the last count in India, there were 89 lakh civil cases pending. 89 lakh, 2.27 crore criminal cases pending in Indian courts. That is 3.17 crore of total cases. In fact, if you add some other kinds of cases like check bouncing, etc., 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 this number actually goes up to almost 3.7 crore cases. Those are pending in our courts. If that shocks you, I will tell you some more. 72,000 of these cases are more than 30 years old. 72,000 of these cases were registered or came to trial before 1989. Many of you were not born then, right? Most millennials were not born then. 3.6 lakh of these cases further after this 72 are 20 to 30 years old. Then if you look at the NCRB, National Crime Records Bureau. Figures are from NCRB, National Crime Records Bureau. It tells you that delays in criminal cases are essentially the largest causes the police delaying filing of charge sheets. Under law, they are supposed to file a charge sheet in 90 days. In 40% of all cases, police did not file the charge sheet in time. More than 3 lakh cases, they say, NCRB says, were still pending investigation by the police after a year, which means it's just piling up. So the story of Tariq pe Tariq has several levels to it because everybody is doing it, not just the courts, the police is doing it, the prosecutors are doing it, everybody is doing it. Then it says something else. Everybody says they should be tried in fast track court. And that is the argument now that these rapists, alleged rapists and murderers should have been sent to a fast track court. So once again, look at the state of your fast track courts. Again, we get this data from NCRB. 40% cases in fast track courts took more than 3 years. Fast track courts, more than 3 years. 3,384 cases in fast track courts have taken, guess how much? Have taken more than 10 years. More than 10 years. Fast track courts. 38,000 cases that were settled in 2017 in fast track courts, only 11,500. That is much less than 1/3 were completed in less than a year. So that is the state of our judicial system. And that's why when people get furious and they say, what the hell is happening? And people go, 7 saal, 8 saal, Nirbhaya case, people are still sitting there, other people are sitting there, then they can escape, then somebody gets a mercy petition, somebody gets a pardon at some point. I think that skepticism is understandable. It is not acceptable because ultimately we are a country of the laws, we are a modern state, modern constitutional republic. We cannot, just because we are impatient with the legal system, and just because the legal system is bad, and just because we are impatient with the police and the police system is bad, and just because we are angry, we cannot transfer this unique and very important monopoly that the state has over violence. Remember, we talked about it earlier. We invoked Baudin and Hobbes and Max Weber. So this is the central attribute of the modern state. And remember that word that Max Weber used, legitimacy. So the state has to have legitimacy, and legitimate methods have to be used for the state to employ violence. For that to happen, you need transparency, you need the rule of laws. Of course, you need the courts to function. Of course, you need the judges of the Supreme Court to rethink whether banning of handcuffs in every case is a good idea or not. It also tells you that the police cannot become a law unto themselves. Because if this happens, today you may celebrate because you think it's happened to other people, but tomorrow it could happen to your people. And when I say other and your, I don't mean Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, nothing. I mean, you think it's happening to poor people or disadvantaged people. But elites like us who are cheering this, it can't happen to us. It doesn't always work like that. See some of the some of the history of Naxal movement, see a film like Hazar Chaurasi Ki Maa, see a film like Hazaron Khwahishein Aisi, and you will know that grown-up boys and girls, even from well-to-do families, middle class, upper middle class, elites also got caught up in this. Because once you lift the restraints of law from your police, you do become, unfortunately, a police state. If not in the entire country, then in every other pocket every now and then. And that is not a good idea.